The Ohio, flowing almost 1,000 miles from its headwaters in Pittsburgh to its rendezvous with the Mississippi. A working river, providing a livelihood for the people in places along its shores for hundreds of years. The Ohio has been and will always be many things to those whose lives are tied to it. For some, a few, the Ohio still means what it always has: food, water, and tranquility. Unexpected gifts drifting from unknown sources, and an inspiration for songs, stories, and paintings. For others, the river is increasingly a playground, delighting and intriguing young and old with the rich variety of experiences it offers. And always, a constant in this changing world, the Ohio is a highway for working boats, carrying people and goods from river to coast and back again.
Stand by.
There's an old adage, and this is an adage that goes back to when Britannia ruled the seas. One hand for you, one hand for the boat. That's expected. Anytime that you work on any kind of water vessel, it's expected one hand for you, one hand for the boat.
Up against the sail, and you need about 5 feet to be down below it. Coming in all the time.
And of course, in severe weather in the cold, you have ice and snow about everywhere. You can't always keep all the ice away. You have condensation, dew that freezes. So the first thing in the morning, you're walking on glass.
5 feet off, 4 feet, 3 feet off, 1 foot off, up against.
You have to be concerned about falling into the river and hitting that water. This time of year, the shock to the body and the vital organs can be astounding. You may be going under with heavy winter clothes soaked with water. You may try to catch your breath and take water on instead. You may only have 30, 40, 50 seconds for someone to help you.
Bob Pager is watchman on a long-haul towboat out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The captain and Bob are positioning the powerful diesel tow behind the barges she will be pushing south for the next 10 days. Bundled up against the January cold, Bob and his crew work the 2-inch lines which pull her temporarily into place.
If the truth were known, there is no romance out here. There is hard work, not enough sleep, generally good food, very few breaks in the action.
The men on the morning watch are wiring together the last of the barges which will make up the tow, a job that began at midnight.
Before you tighten up on it.
Steel cables are stiff with cold, but the heavy winches on their boat, the Steel Pioneer, help ease the hard work. The last cables are tightened, and the local harbor boat, which helped to make up this tow, pulls away. Soon, the Steel Pioneer will ease out into the main channel to join the other working riverboats. Her tow, 15 barges carrying 21,000 tons. Her destination, New Orleans, 1,800 miles ahead.
Bob, as soon as they get their coffee, you're going out there and check that, will you?
Pretty sure they got that plugged in at the
Brake coupling?
Yeah.
Go ahead and unplug it till we get down in the chamber. WZ-C-51 is still Pioneer to lock 2.
Not too bad.
Good morning. We're southbound up here at the oil dock. We got 5 empties and 8 loads and a steel clipper in total.
Gene Sams is captain of the Steel Pioneer. Steering the heavy tow loaded with coke, steel, and benzene, all produced in the Pittsburgh district, is demanding, especially on this heavily industrialized section of the river with its many bridges and busy traffic. And with the sister ship needing repairs tied alongside, extra care is needed. Captain Sams has been on the river for 33 years, starting as a deckhand.
I got a job by accident, you might say. I took an uncle back to the boat to catch his boat at a regular time, and it was in 1948. And they needed a deckhand immediately. And I didn't have any clothes or anything with me, see? They said, "You want a job?" The union man was on there, and I said, "Yeah, I want a job." So my uncle said, well, he'd furnish me clothes until I got back, which was about a week. And that's how I got started on the river. But I like it. It's something different every day. You know, you got different stretches of the river.
Like a lot of river people, Captain Sams is interested in the history of the Ohio, and especially in the many towns, large and small, which are rich in river heritage. This interest began during his early days on an old steamboat.
Every week, they would wash the boilers, and in order to wash the boilers on the old steamboats, you tied up. And the pilot, of course, he didn't have to wash boilers, and he'd go to town, and he'd learn a lot about the history of the different towns, see. But I worked with an old captain. I used to sit up there hours at a time when I was steering. He'd tell me stories about different towns. And every chance he got, he wanted a newspaper. I'd go up the hill and get 4 newspapers, and I'd run up to the museum, talking to different people, and by doing this, I learned a lot about the towns.
Now the largest inland port in the world, Pittsburgh has been the starting point for journeys downriver for over 200 years. Captain Sams and his crew traveled the same route as the countless explorers, settlers, and traders for whom the Ohio was the highway. Flatboats, keelboats, and sternwheelers sailed from this city to settle and develop the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, and to begin the expansion into the far west. Captain Fred Way helped to create as well as record this history. On the Ohio for over 50 years, Captain Way has written many books and articles about the river, and captured a variety of river images from the 1920s and 30s in photographs and moving pictures. He has experienced the romance of the river described by Mark Twain.
You get a real sense of color from reading Mark Twain because he never became really acclimated to the river. From the time he first stepped on Paul Jones until he left the river, a full-fledged pilot, was 4 years. That's a high school course. And the awe of the whole thing was still in his system. And of course, that made for the wonderful book that he wrote about it, Life on the Mississippi, just because he actually did have all this awe about the magnitude of the job of learning the river and whatnot. The river was very primitive. It was turned from you might say, from a dirt road into a 4-lane highway in my time. The locks and dams weren't completed when I first started in.
The Emsworth Lock and Dam, 6 miles below Pittsburgh, is the first of 20 that the steel pioneer must negotiate on the Ohio. It is no easy matter to thread a tow that is 105 feet wide into a lock chamber only 5 feet wider.
Bill pointed on the other wall. You let her come out just a little.
Perfect coordination between captain and crew is required.
200 foot, it'll clear now.
I don't think too many people realize that a standard tow would be 1,000 feet long.
Y'all clear about 20 foot off.
You can scream as loud as you possibly can.
Not
The
much.
wind might be against you. And you might not be able to be heard 200 feet away because the wind is blowing your voice out into the river. But in today's modern technology, we have speakers that are constantly on to the pilot
About
house.
15 foot off.
He doesn't have to hit a switch or anything. You don't have to hit a switch. You just speak towards a speaker, and he can hear you, everything that's going on.
You backing now, Mike? It's coming on in now.
Communication in my time, of course, was very primitive in the early days, and even when I did get to towboat, and I run on radar and all the modern gadgets, but this business of ship-to-shore radio just came in about the time I was towboating, but it hadn't been perfected. It's a rare towboat now that doesn't have 3 ship-to-shore radio systems, all going at once. And the pilot's climbing around there looks like a monkey on a stick, reaching for these microphones. And he's coming in a locker doing something. And he's learned how to do that. Guide that tow, which is no mean feat going in a lock, and he can be telling the man down in the office what barges he's got and where they are in the tow and so on. I'd shut that whole thing off while I was doing a job like that.
There are times you're coming down into a lock. The man driving the boat, of course, he's doing his best. You're trying to help him out there with a line. You're talking to him on a speaker, trying to get set up to go into that lock. But a time comes when you say, we're not going to make it. We're going to hit this wall, and we're moving 5 miles an hour. And you have mass and inertia. You hit something at 5 miles an hour, the rigging flies. And when it flies, you don't know where it's going. All you know, it's hard, it's heavy, and it's steel. It doesn't hurt, you do. Things can happen fractions of seconds.
Yeah, they're gonna make an ice locker.
The masses of ice in the lock chamber must be flushed through before the tow can enter, delaying the steel pioneer's progress downriver. But schedules have little meaning for Anna and Harlan Hubbard. The Hubbards first landed here at Payne Hollow, Kentucky, 35 years ago, when drifting down the Ohio in their shanty boat. They returned 5 years later to make this bit of untouched riverbank below Cincinnati their home. Anna and Harlan have an especially intimate relationship with the Ohio, a relationship which Harlan describes in his 2 books, Shanty Boat and Payne Hollow, and which he seeks to express in his paintings. The long path up from the river leads through the garden to the house, hidden in the woods, and to Harlan's studio.
I think painters have painted people too much. A man is a subject, you know, and the river might be a background or the landscape, but I think if I ever contribute anything, it'll be a painting from the other viewpoint, from the outside looking in. Well, look at those early paintings of the river that have a big flatboat in the foreground with somebody dancing a jig, and that's the sort of thing I'd leave out. You know, I'd wait till they drifted by and paint the river without them in it. It's just a different attitude. The river is something that at first doesn't attract people. I know one time Elfrida came out with her husband from California, and she told me, she was a river rat herself, she was raised around here, but she said when he crossed the river, and she said, now that is the Ohio River. And he said, what, that muddy slough? You can understand that, you know. But the river, if you get to know it better, it has a great many qualities that are very valuable. It isn't sensational, but, well, the woman you want to live with, she would need to be a raving beauty. That might be a hazard instead. Take somebody that has other qualities that are real more valuable for long-term living. And I think the river's that way too. If you get to know it, you just don't want to be away from it. That's what they mean by getting into your blood.
Being a painter, he was interested in boat pictures to use in making these paintings and so on, and I was quite an avid photographer, so I furnished him pictures and whatnot. And not until last year, 1980, did I shake hands with him. Well, it's no wonder, really, because he's in such an out-of-the-way place up there on that mountainside. You either have to fall down the mountain or else risk life and limb coming across the river.
All my life, I wanted to get away from it. I'd rather go out and build a fire in a riverbank than have electricity or electric stove or anything. And I was aiming that way all my life. But Anna's different. She was raised in the city and lived in the city until all of a sudden she married me and we went to the riverbank. And
we had lived 2 years on the shanty boat at Brent, where Harlan built the boat, before we started to make our trip down the river. So I was gradually getting used to living on the water instead of living on land. Well, we did it quite gradually.
When we lived at Brent, we had good shanty boat neighbors too, real old, genuine shanty boaters that don't exist anymore. And they taught us a lot, and we had a chance to become acquainted with them and learn about their lives and what their outlook was.
That's where Harlan learned to fish, with Andy Dedish.
We learned a lot from them, but most of it's in shanty boat. Have you read those chapters, those early chapters?
I read it with great gusto. It was a very fresh approach to a river subject. Most people talk about old steamboats and so on. Here he was talking about a shanty boat. Well, those things used to be as common as can be on a river. Every town had shanty boats. All the poor people lived down in the shanty boats. Yeah, my wife and I started to collect an old refrigerator and one thing and another. We were going to build a shanty boat. We never got it done. That's probably another reason I admire Harlan. He really did it.
A shanty boat is not a very complimentary name. They think it's a shacky, disreputable little boat that is owned by a fellow who's not quite on the level sometimes and wouldn't hesitate to pick up something that didn't belong to him.
Sure.
But when we started to live on the river, we thought it would just be a trip down the river and on the shanty boat, and we'd come back and didn't know what to do then. But it took a lot longer, for one thing. It took years instead of months, 4 years before we got to New Orleans, after we started, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then when we never did come back to what we were before, because it changed us, it influenced us from the very beginning, and finally we realized that we never could come back and live in town again and live a conventional life. And that put us apart right away, and we began to live in what I call the fringe of society. But you have a different attitude toward everything if you're a shanty boater. You don't take things so seriously, for one thing. You're sort of a trusting soul that take things as they come.
That's carp.
After an hour's delay, Captain Sams and his pilot, Mike Monahan, have finally entered the Emsworth Lock. Built over 50 years ago, this lock is now showing its age. Its small chamber means that a standard 1,100-foot tow has to be locked through in 2 sections.
The worst part is here in this Pittsburgh district, Emsworth, Dash Hills, and Montgomery, we still have to break tolls up at Galplis Lock. It's very hazard because you've got a bend in the wall. It's not as bad northbound. It's really a hazard going downstream because you've got to do everything with a line.
A 1,200-foot lock chamber you can make in 30 minutes. Pittsburgh district, you can figure at least 2 hours per lock. I've been around, you know, in the ice, take 5, 6 hours. You know, took a whole cold, hard winter, and you know, in the ice problems. I was down there at Markland 21 days before we ever got through there one time.
The age of these early locks is also showing in other ways. Their condition is deteriorating and necessary repairs aren't always made. Funding is, of course, the problem. To keep the towboats moving on the upper Ohio will require a major investment.
I think we need a balanced transportation. We need the trucking and the river and the railroads, and I think they should keep that in mind. You know, like on the construction of these new locks where they expedite these tolls down the river so they don't have so much delays. If we try to keep a happy balance there, and I think it'd work out a lot better for everybody.
Massive lock gates close and open, lowering the steel Pioneer 15 feet. And the crew use pike poles to push large pieces of ice away from between the barges so they can be wired together again.
Picking up a little more headway. I'm about 5 feet above. I got plenty of ice in here.
I think she'll come together when I get her going out here, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, if we get enough.
Yeah, we'll get her down the next log. Steel Pioneer, the Gregory J.
Mike Monahan has taken the watch from Gene Sams. He guides the Steel Pioneer back into the main channel with the hydraulic steering levers found in a modern pilot house.
In the old days, the boats were steered by hand. You didn't have a mechanical assistance in steering. And you had to waltz that big pilot wheel around. And the old-time pilots were much more subject to being ruptured. Nearly all the old pilots were ruptured from the sheer physical exertion of pulling these wheels around. They didn't go to hospitals in those days. They wore trusses and so on, limped around. And most the pilots had to be farmers because the river would go dry in June and there wouldn't be a rise come along probably till Thanksgiving time. They knew as much about Timothy and cows and chickens and pigs and so on as they did about steamboats. And the conversation in the pilot house concerned all these things. These old geezers going on about their Plymouth Rocks and their Rhode Island Reds and so forth.
Bob Pager and the other deckhands are checking the barges for leaks, a routine that goes on every watch, day and night. Ice, submerged logs, and other underwater obstructions can tear holes in the steel plates. As they move steadily out to the front of the tow, the noise of the engines fades away, leaving only the river's sounds. There has always been something special about the Ohio. To early explorers, settlers, and travelers, it was known as La Belle Rivière, the beautiful river. Over the centuries, many writers have described the magical appeal of water.
Herman Melville says mankind is always drawn to the water. In Moby Dick, he expands on that for 2 or 3 pages about being drawn down to the water. Farmers from Indiana going to be whalers. They say that once you work on the river, you'll never get away from it. You don't necessarily have to be a deckhand forever, but still being able to walk out and gaze at that expanse of water, be it a small creek or a small river or a great lake or anything, you still have that need to be I've been on the river for 4 years. I still, in the middle of tightening a ratchet or doing something out on tow, I will still at times have to stop and just gaze upon the sunlight on the water, the trees. And you think of some hardy He-Man river type who can stop and say, yeah, isn't that nice? Working on the river, I don't think you'll ever see it all. There's something new to learn every day, and there's something new to see every day, be it a sunset. You have beautiful starlit nights.
You'd think you'd get used to the river, and the sunset would become a sunset, and the sunrise would be a sunrise. So, but it's always different. I've never stood 2 watches in succession that weren't different. They're always different. And there's always this quality of expectation, something around the corner.
Okay, just floating right on that hole there now. We'll try her one time, see if it comes together. Not too quickly.
Locking through goes on at night without interruption. Up in the pilot house, Mike Monahan has the midnight to 6 a.m. watch.
Whenever I'm on watch, I'm up here in the pilot house. I'll talk to people that come up here, but I would just as soon be up here by myself a lot of times. You get in these big, long pools. Hell, there's pools down in the, when you get on down further down, you get hell, they're 100 miles long. You go 100 miles and you'll go just, I mean, it's really in the country. I mean, it's not like this. You're in a town all the time. You'll go for miles and never see a light. See deer and stuff, but it's pretty, it's beautiful. And a good, nice, real moonlit night, you can see real good. It's really nice, especially in the summertime.
Summertime running is a different world from the harsh conditions of winter, especially here on the southern Ohio, where wooded shores and farms replace the heavy industry characteristic of upper reaches. The ice and cold of winter are gone, but the crew must now cope with heat, fog, and low water. Yet summertime can also bring its own special surprises which help to break the routine. The Belle of Louisville is one of the last original excursion boats still plying the Ohio. Built in Pittsburgh in 1914, she continues to delight passengers and crew alike. But there are other working boats which have vanished from the Ohio, victims of a changing technology. No one sees mail boats, show boats, ferries, and packet boats anymore.
Well, I've seen the working steamboats when I was just a boy, but right here at Payne Hollow, in this section of the river, that local packet trade continued long after it had vanished everywhere else, because there's no road along here, and it's very difficult to build a road. You can see by these shores. So all these isolated little hollows and even towns depended on this local river traffic. And there was quite a fleet of, not at one time, but at different times, of little boats, and they were very picturesque. And a steamboat was designed by nature. It's a natural, organic growth. That's what makes it beautiful. And I've painted pictures of a lot of those old boats. Then on the other hand, there were the big mail line boats, about 300 feet long, but nothing exclusive about them. They'd stop anywhere. If a fellow waved at them or yelled or waved a lantern at night, they'd come in to see what he wanted, and it might be just he wanted to go to the next town, or he might have created chickens to ship to town, or couldn't tell. That was Carl Turner told that story.
Go on, tell it.
They went in to see what he wanted and say, could you change a half a dollar for me?
There's a new generation now that doesn't even know what a packet boat is. They were the Greyhound bus of their time. They'd operate in short trades. They were a passenger boat upstairs and a freight boat downstairs. We carried hogs and cattle and chickens and turkeys and geese and you name it. Bring it to the markets here at Pittsburgh. And this seems sort of incongruous to have all this zoo downstairs and the passengers upstairs, and we didn't have a screen on the boat. None of the staterooms were screened or the doors or anything, so we had to have these revolving fans to keep the flies off the food, of course, because the dinner table went right down through the middle there. Nobody ever took the top piece of bread off a platter of bread. You always reached under and got the second. The top was the roof for the flies to land. But I don't know, we survived somehow.
Ida Renner, cook on the Steel Pioneer, sees that her crew does a lot better than just survive. She gets up at 4 o'clock every morning to begin preparing the day's meals.
Oh, yes, you pick the cook with care, because that made a great difference in the attitude of the crew and one thing and another.
The job that I had before, I needed a change of pace. I needed a new job, something new. So I decided to make a switch from a supervisor in a garment factory to the cook on the river. But I'm just a general cook. I'm not a fancy cook. Just right down home cooking. I wouldn't say that there's a lot of dining done out here. There isn't too much else for them to do, so their major thing is their meals. And some of them eat all day long. I expect everybody to have enough to eat, and if they don't get enough, I expect them to tell me about it. I don't expect anyone to get up from a table hungry. So any little extra that can be done, I'm here to do it. Saturday night is T-bone steak night, and you get to order your steak how you like it. It's another little thing that we always do out here, too, is if anyone on board has a birthday, the cook automatically makes them a birthday cake. It turns out to be like a small family. We all live together out here. Then it's just like another little world. So the cook has, or maybe it's just me, I wouldn't say, but, well, she's the one that everybody leans on, you know. Somebody's got a problem, somebody's homesick, and whatever, and the cook's got a job to take care of this, you know, really hold the crew together. Or maybe that's the way I look at it.
Well, okay. Everything all right? What do you need?
I had been out here working 3 years, and I hadn't been home for Christmas in 3 years. This Christmas, I was home, and it didn't seem the same. It seemed like I was missing something of not being here to prepare that meal. I don't know. There's something about it. I guess I have the river in my blood now. If someone would have told me this 6 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it, but today I can tell you it's true. You get it, it's in your blood. You've done very well give it something up like this. It usually stick right with it. I also have a small hobby since I started on the river, and is that I take photographs of very scenic places that we have along our rivers. Most of them are very beautiful. I have a scrap album made of the pictures that I've taken. And I hope to, when I settle down, or maybe in the future, is to take some of the pictures that I've snapped to do them in oils. Now, not portraits or anything, only scenes, because along the river, Most people don't see it from our viewpoint.
The river enters into everything, really, and it's hard to say just all the things it influences, but one thing is just living by the river, you're looking at it all the time, and it's a wonderful thing to look at because it's changing all the time, and it adds something to your life that I don't believe I could ever live away from water. There's a lot of specific influences the river has, but like, well, we get the fish out of the river, and it's something to eat, and the reason I'm so careful with this backbone, that's and then cooks that and makes soup out of it, catfish soup. Very good. Last fall, when it got so dry, it was dry all fall and all winter. Our cistern was almost empty, and we wanted to conserve our drinking water as much as possible, so we carried water up from the river every day.
I even washed dishes in river water. And we did all our washing with it. You know, even washing vegetables and, well, our own bathing and washing clothes and everything like that. There's a lot of water use that isn't strictly drinking water.
Which speaks well for the purity of the water. It didn't kill us anyway. You can smoke anything. We smoke garfish and of course carp, and then we catch eel too. That's the best of all. Smoked eel. We get a lot of our fuel out of the river, keep us warm. We get a lot of good material to work with, make things out of. Of course, the river is one of those, it's inexorable. It takes away as much as it brings, so if you're not careful, it'll carry away something that you really want sometimes. We've never had any serious losses that way, though.
And Harlan's wonderful at using whatever there is. You'd be surprised at some of the ways in which he uses the things he finds.
Well, that door was a piece of driftwood, just came in that way, but it was 16 feet long, and it even had the holes rotted through where the nails had once been, where you could get a handhold on it. And it just looked like a door when you saw it, so you put it up there. You work with material. You don't work plan things ahead. You start with material and your hands, and that's why we built the house. We had no plan at all. We just had a general idea where we wanted the house and general idea of the size, and we started to work on it. And you work along that way, and your material often suggests things that you wouldn't have thought of in the beginning. Very often a piece of junk will suggest a solution to a problem or something new you never thought of.
Another grand thing that Harlan has done is bring that piano in here for me. Of course, all the years we lived on the shanty boat, and the first 4 years we lived in the house here, we didn't have space for a piano, and so we had music, of course. We had my cello and Harlan's violin and viola with us on the shanty boat. But of course, as soon as we had the big living room built, Harlan arranged to have the grand piano moved down, which was a great undertaking.
We had to have a piano because it's one thing that brought us together. I wouldn't say I married her for an accompanist, but it was the beginning.
Yes, that was the beginning. It's meant a great deal to both of us to have the piano, of course. But
I can't, she won't let me touch it, though.
I don't let him tune it. And even a good professional sometimes doesn't please me too much.
The river's, I don't know, it's more than a river. It's more than the beauty of the landscape. It gets pretty deep after a while, but some things you might write about them if you had plenty of time. That's what I've tried to do in those books. I write the things I can't say. And that's what this journal we're talking about, too. I write things in there just to myself. And maybe someday I'll get all this together and say better what I mean, but it's just a different basis for your life. There have been, no doubt, changes. I like the changeless word for rivers, though, because the river goes on just the same as it always was. But it can't help being affected by things that man has done to it. These new dams on the Belle and the Ohio, for one thing, have raised the pool of the river up almost to where it was high water before. That put it up beyond the willows that fringed the river before, up into the farmland, the cropland. So that margin of river that used to be between the cultivated land and the water, kind of a no man's land, which is an ideal place for a shanty boat to beach out and have a little garden and do whatever you wanted to, is gone.
We don't have the deposit of soil from a flood, from a real over-the-garden flood anymore. And keeping the water at halfway up the bank makes waves from the boats and from the wind digging into the banks at that level. And that way exposing roots of trees, and they all go down the river. In a few years you've lost a whole row of great big trees that used to be there.
Even that, people come here and they say, I'd like to live the way you do, but I just can't get out of this. What would I do? How would I pay my taxes and keep the house going? And then my wife has to have certain things, and children in school, there's nothing else to do. But I believe there is something else to do, but it's just for certain people, for the individuals in whom individuality is very strong. Those kind of people go to the river, I guess, and that's the last frontier. It's the only place in this part of the country where you can find any real touch of wilderness is on the riverbank.
As you go south, like this time of year down here, it's so humid and hot. Fellows they're not careful, they get overheated. It's hard work. It's a lot of heavy lifting, and sometime you'll make up a whole 30 barge tow. That gets to be pretty long hard. Of course, the fellows only work 6 hours, but you can get pretty well tired out in 6 hours.
Decking isn't always heavy work. When the tow slows to top up her fuel tanks, the crew sees new faces or exchanges greetings with old friends. But the southern sun makes even refueling difficult. When working on steel barges whose surfaces may be 130 degrees, deckhands can feel the heat right through their boots. The cool air in the lock below Louisville provides a relief. The modern 1,200-foot chamber, twice as big as those in the Pittsburgh district, slowly lowers the tow 35 feet. And the crew won't have to make a double locking. But the cool chamber brings little relief in the engine room, where temperatures may be 120 degrees. Tough working conditions with which Angelo Adams, chief engineer, has a long familiarity.
The boat I started on was the old sternwheeler, and you shoveled coal on it. They had boilers. That's 1948. I used to crawl up the stairs at night. Still a young kid, but I crawled up from bending over. Years ago, when we'd come up the Mississippi River or something, you would do 2.5, maybe 3 miles an hour. Now with these boats here that they've come out with the diesel engine, they go 7, 8, 10 miles an hour, depending on the horsepower of the boat. As a chief engineer, you're responsible for everything mechanical on a boat, electrical. In other words, you have to be a jack of all trades, really. Know something about machinery. You have to be a plumber, electrician, just everything.
The old-timers, they had to take a blacksmith shop along with them and know how to fix machinery and all that kind of thing, jury on the job. An engineer not only had to be an engineer, but he had to be a first-class mechanic. And there was no coal up there to fire the boilers, and they had to go out and chop trees down. And in order to get trees chopped up, they had to have a sawmill with them.
We've got 5,600 horsepower, and I remember some of those old boats was carrying 20 standard coal, which is almost equal to this, with 1,000 horsepower steamboat, or not over 2,000, see? And they're doing the same work as we're doing, only took them longer, but we've got a lot of modern equipment now, radios, radars and things helped us. Now, I work without radar. It puts a strain on you. Try to run as long as you can before the fog sets in.
We had no radar when I first started on the river. When you'd get lost in a fog, believe me, brother, you can get lost in a fog out in the middle of the river and you don't know which way's up. And some pilot figured out that if you'd run that boat full head and then stop her and wait a little bit, you'd hear the waves breaking on shore. And you could guide yourself ashore by where this sound was coming from. And I've seen that done more than once. In fact, I've done it myself.
At different times of year, it fogs at different times of the night, but like this morning, it fogged just about daybreak. Of course, we have deep water and we can navigate pretty safely up here. These radars, you can be pretty accurate. But I've always felt like if you didn't feel like running, you should tie up. You have a feeling, or, you know, that, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. And that's a good time to tie up, especially when the current's running. Now, today, there's very little current today. We could probably navigate safely, but this is the time of year, too. We're going in an area where there's going to be some motorboats, houseboats, a lot of recreational boats. And these people don't always know a whole lot about boats, so they might be out in the way or something. That's one reason we tie up this time of year.
After 4 hours of waiting, the fog lifts. The line to shore is taken in. While waiting, Captain Sams has been constantly in touch with the office via radio. But high water once forced Captain Fred Way to tie up.
And we sat there for 4 days. We had no communication with the office, and they thought we were lost as completely as though we'd gone to Egypt. They didn't know where we were. And finally, a farmer came along there, and he's the one that got the word to the outside world where we were. He went back through the country there and got to a telephone someplace. So the lost had been found. There's 7 barges of gasoline and a $1 million towboat were safe. But we were clear out of communication with everybody. I kind of liked that.
But even when the office didn't hear from Captain Way, no one worried that the boat may have been captured by pirates. This was a real fear for 19th century travelers passing notorious Cave-In Rock, where pirates waited for flatboats and keelboats, took their cargo, and often killed crew and passengers. Today, Cave-In Rock is a park for picnickers and boaters. During the summer, pleasure boats of all kinds dot the surface of the Ohio. This recreational use of the river is not new. People have been fishing, swimming, and boating on the Ohio for years. But the river's appeal has increased dramatically over the last decade. Catalyzed in part by improvements in water quality, a new generation of river rats has been born.
It's a tremendous natural resource for the citizens and commercial people. I'm sold on it. It's in my blood, I know that. It's not blue water and it's not clear. You can't see the bottom, but in its own little way, it has its blue look to me.
Al Bernstein operates a riverfront restaurant, the Mike Fink. Located across the river from Cincinnati, it is named for a legendary figure, supposedly the toughest keel boatman on the Ohio. Originally an old packet boat, it has been converted into a unique setting where diners can enjoy the river's ever-changing scene. Al, who also runs an excursion boat line, is one of the many people who make their living by responding to the growing interest in the river.
The people of Cincinnati are using the river and coming to the river more and more now for recreation. They're dining at river restaurants. They're looking over at parks that overlook the river. They're coming to the river. I would talk to a boat broker in Cincinnati, and you would think in today's economy, nobody would be buying boats. His business has never been better. And as far as our excursion boats go, we have to coexist with a pleasure boater, somebody much less knowledgeable about the rules of the road and the way they should conduct themselves on the river. But the commercial vessels in the area, for some unknown reason, intermingle very well with them. When a towboat comes by here and a boater's out here swimming and skiing, instead of merely running them over and saying the heck with them, they let them know that they're there, and you see a guy scamp back to the boat and away they go, knowing that they've sort of overstepped their bounds.
I'm not against motorboaters, but you know, it makes it rough running through a bank-to-bank river full of motorboaters. You gotta be on your toes there, say for like a 3-day holiday.
For towboat captains like Gene Sams, the river regattas, which Pittsburgh and many other cities are now sponsoring, may make running difficult. But even the working boats often take time out to join in the festivities, which include water skiing demonstrations, boat parades, and races. Commercial and pleasure boats will have to learn to coexist, for this return to the river seems here to stay. More and more cities are rediscovering the value of their waterfronts and the appeal of these special river events.
Hundreds of thousands of people come and they line the bridges and the riverbanks and boats. The river, you almost can't see the river from the tremendous amount of boats that are throughout, and the Coast Guard must go crazy on those days. They must have to see a psychiatrist on Monday because it's crazy.
Sternwheeler races, once commonplace on the Ohio, are now a main feature of many regattas. Contests between famous old boats like the Natchez and the Robert E. Lee were carried in newspapers and captured in songs and paintings. Impromptu races were often held between sternwheelers who happened to meet, with the passengers enthusiastic participants. The river bottom has the remains of many an old boat whose captain got so carried away that the boilers would overheat and explode. Crossing the finish line today is as exciting for captain and crew as it was 100 years ago.
Okay, all right. Okay. Really, the race was starting tonight. It was pretty close there. I had them all.
This joyful return to the river by boaters, water skiers, and people who just enjoy looking at the water doesn't tell the whole story. Equally important is the growing love affair people are having with the romance of the historic Ohio. Graceful sternwheelers like the Delta Queen capture the spirit of an age now gone, when boats like her were commonplace and played a major economic and social role in riverfront communities. Saved for at least a while, the Delta Queen carries thousands of nostalgia-seeking passengers on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Captain Fred Way is the man who brought her from California through the Panama Canal to these waters.
It's a pretty good-sized boat, 285 feet long. And she had a flat bottom, and I had visions of great big waves on the Pacific Ocean with a wave under one end and a wave under the other end and nothing under the middle. And then what was going to happen? Well, we finally took the whole problem to the Coast Guard out there. We wanted to raise steam on her and paddle her around, but he nearly fell backwards off his chair when he heard this story, so he said, "Ixnay." So we hired a tug and hitched her on a big, long line. And she came around just as nice as could be.
Only 4 of these old wooden sternwheelers, these living museums, still remain to remind us of the age when steamboats ruled the Ohio. And so the river's past lives on, preserved in museums, libraries, paintings, photographs, and in the memories of people.
Working on the river, I don't think you'll ever see it all. There's something new to learn every day, and there's something new to see every day.
I don't know. There's something about it. I guess I have the river in my blood now.
I've never stood 2 watches in succession that weren't different. They're always different. And there's always this quality of expectation, something around the corner.
The river is something that at first doesn't attract people. But the river, if you get to know it better, you just don't want to be away from it.
Its journey through space and time now over, the Ohio joins the Mississippi, and a new journey to the sea begins. The Ohio has served past and present generations well, meeting changing needs and dreams. As for the future, Oliver Wendell Holmes perhaps said it well. A river is more than an amenity. It is a treasure. It offers a necessity of life that must be rationed among those who have power over it.